Welcome, everyone, to vpod.ai. I'm your host, Mike, and I'm joined by our expert, Susan. You can sponsor this podcast for just $25. Your message will be featured across major platforms like Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and more. If you're interested, visit vpod.ai to get started today. Now, to kick things off, I want you to picture something. Have you ever felt like you're running on a financial treadmill and just when you speed up, someone cranks the incline?
Oh, yeah, like you're sweating, you're working harder, but
Right. You're staying in the exact same place. Or, honestly, you realize you're actually sliding backward. So today's exploration looks at the exact numbers and realities facing older Americans as we look ahead to 2027. We're looking at the latest data and, well, Social Security recipients are looking at a potential raise of nearly 4%.
which is the biggest jump we've seen since 2023, actually.
Exactly. And on the surface, that sounds fantastic, right? Like a raise is a raise. But as we'll uncover today, this raise reveals a hidden crisis.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that we aren't just looking at what the increase is, but really why it's happening, and the massive ripple effects it has on the whole system. Because a bump like that, in this context, it's not really a reward, it's a symptom.
Right, it's like a warning flare going up. Okay, let's unpack this from the top because we need to get the headline numbers out of the way so you, the listener, understand the immediate financial impact before we zoom out.
Good idea. So the Senior Citizens League, they're an advocacy group that tracks this stuff heavily. They're estimating a 2027 cost of living adjustment, which we usually just call the KOLA.
Yeah, the KOLA.
Right, so they're projecting it at about 3.9%, which is wild because earlier in the year, projections were sitting between like 2 and 3%.
Which is a huge jump, and they aren't the only ones saying this, right?
No, not at all. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, the CRFB, they estimate a really similar 3.8%. And they even said it could range anywhere from 3 to 4.5%, depending on how things shake out.
Wow. Okay, so what does that actually mean for the wallet? Like, in January, the average monthly benefit was, what, around $2,071?
Yeah, exactly. $2,071. So if we apply a 3.9% boost to that, it adds about $80.77, bringing the typical check to like $2,152.
Okay, let's unpack this. Adding $80 a month sounds like a win on paper. It's like getting an extra tank of gas or covering a utility bill. But if the projections jumped from 2% to nearly 4% so suddenly, is this actually a raise? Or is it just a desperate game of catch-up?
It's 100% catch-up. I mean, you have to remember that a COLA isn't a bonus. It's literally a structural necessity meant to keep pace with inflation.
Right.
But it's struggling to do so. When the projection spikes like this, it means the cost of basic survival is accelerating way faster than anyone thought it would.
Which naturally brings us to the driving force behind all this. We just established the projection jumped to nearly 4%, but we need to figure out why.
Yeah, the underlying cause.
Right. And looking at the data, inflation just climbed to its fastest pace in almost 3 years. We were at 3.3% in March, and then, bam, up to 3.8% annually in April.
And the major villain there is energy prices.
Oh, completely. Energy drove 40% of that April increase. And advocacy groups are hearing from seniors who are just really struggling specifically with fuel prices caused by the Iran war.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you live on a fixed income, geopolitical events like the Iran war, they hit you instantly. You just don't have the wiggle room for a sudden, $30 jump at the gas pump.
Which is brutal. But there's this concept we need to explore from Alex Moore. He's a statistician. And he said the inflation from rising oil prices is just the tip of the iceberg.
The downstream effects.
Right. He said downstream effects are coming. Farming crops, transporting goods, operating factory machinery, all of that will get more expensive. So here's where it gets really interesting. Wait. If the Iran war is causing an energy shock now, and that eventually trickles down to food and goods later, aren't seniors going to get hit twice?
Yes. That is exactly what happens. It's the interconnectedness of the economy. Energy isn't just, the gas you put in your car to go to the pharmacy.
Right.
It's the invisible cost baked into literally everything you buy. So you get that first hit immediately at the pump. But then it takes time for the farmer paying more for diesel to pass that cost to the distributor.
Right, the supply chain.
Exactly. And then the distributor passes it to the grocery store. So by the time you're buying a box of cereal months later, the price has inflated across 3 or 4 different touch points.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like, well, it's like dropping a heavy boulder into a pond. The initial splash gets you wet immediately, which is the gas pump hit today.
Perfect analogy.
But the ripples keep moving outward, hitting the shore way later, long after the boulder has sunk.
Exactly. The ripple effect means that even if global oil prices stabilize tomorrow, the retail cost of goods keeps rising for months because the supply chain is still catching up.
Man, that is tough. But wait, if the bleeding is this bad, shouldn't the government's formula just automatically correct for this? Like, catch them up quickly?
You'd hope so. But this brings us to a massive flaw in the formula itself. The CLLA calculation is actually backward-looking.
Backward-looking, how so?
Well, the 2027 adjustment is based only on inflation from July through September.
Wait, really? Just a 3-month window?
Just those 3 months. July, August, September of the previous year. That's it.
That is wild.
Yeah.
So if energy prices totally spike in April, like we just saw with the Iran war impact, and then maybe they cool off a tiny bit by July, does the formula just ignore all that financial pain from the spring?
It completely ignores it. If prices spike before that narrow window opens, or if they spike right after it closes, seniors just lose ground.
It's like relying on a weather forecast from last week to decide if you need an umbrella today.
Exactly.
Or worse, using a teenager's spending habits to calculate a retiree's budget. It just doesn't align.
And this raises an important question, right? Whose inflation are we actually measuring? Because the long-term damage of this misalignment is staggering. Over the last decade, Social Security benefits have lost almost 14% of their value.
14%. That's not just a rounding error. That's a massive hit to someone's livelihood.
It's a tragedy, mathematically speaking. And the why behind it goes back to your teenager analogy. The inflation index the government uses reflects the costs of urban wage earners. It tracks things like commuting, apparel, electronics.
Things seniors aren't buying as much.
Right. The index doesn't accurately reflect the specific costs seniors face, most notably higher healthcare expenses, which always rise way faster than general inflation.
So because the index doesn't weigh healthcare heavily enough, it tells the government that inflation is lower than what a senior's actually experiencing.
Precisely. So year after year, they get a CLA that falls just slightly short of their actual cost of living. And over 10 years, that compound deficit eats up 14% of their purchasing power.
Wow. Okay, so that's the micro level. The individual senior struggling with a flawed formula. But we need to transition to the macro, the ripple effect on the whole system. Because if these individuals need this higher 4% raise just to survive, the big question is, can the system actually afford to pay it?
And that is the systemic threat. We know the final CLA won't be set until October, but paying a higher rate means draining the trust funds faster.
Right, because that money has to come from somewhere.
Exactly. The CRFB estimates that this projected CLA would worsen the Social Security shortfall by roughly $300 billion over the next decade.
Okay, I have to stop you there. $300 billion.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? If you are looking at this, how does a seemingly small percentage change, like jumping up to a 3.9% CLA, translate to a $300 billion shortfall? That seems disproportionate.
I know it sounds crazy, but it comes down to compounding. When you give a 3.9% increase, you aren't just paying that extra $80 once. You are baking it into the baseline benefit for every single month for millions of people permanently. And the next year's CLA is calculated on top of that new higher baseline.
Oh, man. So it compounds against the system.
Exactly. It drastically advances the timeline for insolvency. The CRFB noted that this higher CLA actually advances the insolvency of the Old Age Trust Fund by 3 months. It pulls it from late 2032 to earlier in 2032.
2032 is just around the corner. That is terrifyingly close.
It is, which is why there are proposals on the table right now to address it. For instance, the CRFB is urging lawmakers to cap benefits for wealthy retired couples at $100,000.
Okay, and just to be clear, we're remaining strictly neutral here. We aren't taking a side on whether capping benefits is right or wrong. We just want to put the facts on the table. So mathematically, what does that proposal do?
Right. Looking purely at the math, capping those benefits at $100,000 could save about $190 billion over a decade. Yeah, and that would close about 20% of the system's solvency gap. So a high CLA depletes the fund faster, which then prompts these massive $100K cap proposals just to try and plug a $300 billion hole.
It really shows how every single piece of this is connected. Well, what a journey today. We started out looking at this headline, 3.9% projection, which seemed like good news.
Right, the $80.
Yeah, the extra $80. But then we uncovered the energy shock driven by the Iran war and how it's pushing up inflation.
And those downstream supply chain ripples.
Exactly. And then we looked at that wildly flawed July through September calculation window, which is causing benefits to lose 14% of their value.
Because of the healthcare costs.
Right. And finally, we just saw how this is putting a $300 billion strain on the system's solvency, bringing us closer to that 2032 deadline and forcing proposals like the $100,000 cap onto the table. It is just a massive amount to wrap your head around.
It really is, and I think it leaves us with something important to ponder. If the inflation formula designed to protect our most vulnerable citizens is simultaneously eroding their purchasing power and accelerating the bankruptcy of the entire system, does the fundamental architecture of our safety net need to be completely reimagined from the ground up?
That is a fascinating thought to end on. Truly something you, the listener, should mull over as you watch these numbers unfold. Thanks for joining us for this exploration on vpod.ai. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.